All right, welcome to the first talk of the MiniDebConfOnline, day one. It is Managing External Repositories with Extrepo by Wouter.
All right, thank you. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or good night, wherever you might be on the world. That's the interesting part about being on the internet. My name is Wouter Verhelst. I've been dealing with I've been a Debian developer since about 2001. Since actually exactly 2001. And since 2014, I've also been involved with this other thing in my day job, which is called the Belgian Electronic ID software. We maintain software there for Debian as an external repository, and that actually showed to me that the way we do external repositories in Debian isn't ideal, and I wanted to do something about that. So here we go.
Wouter, you have muted yourself.
This should be better. Okay, I'll start from scratch. Sorry about that. So yeah, my damn it. So yeah, what I was saying is my name is Wouter Verhelst. I've been a Debian developer since 2001, and since 2014 I've also been involved in the external repository. Sorry, the AID software, software meant to help the Belgian electronic ID card, which is shipped through an external repository, a repository that is not Debian, a software repository. And through this experience, I noticed that third-party developers with third-party repositories are not really handled very well in Debian. And that inspired me to create something called Extrepo, which is what this talk is about. Before Extrepo, what's available? What are the things that we have? Well, people commonly will do something like curl and then for a shell script and then pipe that into a shell, run as root, which then downloads the repository, creates apt configuration, etc., etc. It works, but it is directly opposite to what we tell people to do, which is don't just run any random shell scripts off the internet, especially not as root. And to kind of mitigate that, they didn't go like, well, please read our shell script. But most of those shell scripts, if you look at them, are long and complicated, and you can't really read them. You can't expect everybody to understand that. So it's not really an ideal situation. Other options are things like where people run dpackage on, or just install a single unsigned package. This is the system that, for instance, Google Chrome uses, which then contains the software, but also the repository key and apt configuration so that your package will be automatically updated. This kind of works, but has a downside that, first of all, this package isn't signed, so it could be replaced by something else. And, excuse me, second of all, this way the repository is always written and it has a downside that if people want to use want to install it in a different way, well, things can go wrong that way, as I've actually noticed through Extrepo. There are also places where people will just run manual instructions, like here's the key that you need to install, this is the config file that you need to add, here's where the deb repo is, and that works, but sometimes it's a bit more than we can expect inexperienced users to understand how to do, and it's not ideal for that reason. This is not all. I've seen worse cases, people where they just don't give any of the above and just expect you to figure it out. Well, this is the URL and just do what you need to do. Those are even worse. I mean, to summarize everything, it's really a mess. The way things are configured, the way things are done for third-party repositories, it's a mess, and it should be better. You might think, well, it's not possible to do it better because this is how it works. We don't have a relationship with the third-party developers. How are we going to do that? Well, maybe you're right, but then again, if we look at other operating systems, and I'm talking about non-free operating systems here, they do have solutions for that. If you look at, this is the wrong button. If you look at macOS, for instance, they have their own certificate authority, and if you want to provide some Apple software that needs to be signed by this certificate authority. They even make it difficult on a standard Apple installation to install software that is not shipped through their own app store. We don't do that, and I think we shouldn't do that. But still, it's a limitation that, I mean, it's a way of making sure that software is always signed when you install it. Windows does something very similar too. They have a number of approved commercial CAs with various restrictions on the CA, and they encourage installation in the Windows Store, but your software is always signed. So it is possible to do this. In the Linux and BSD world, this is usually there is some way of signing, but there isn't a way to extend signing beyond the initial installation. With that, I mean you can't easily, on most distributions, you can't easily install software from a third party without breaking the trust path somewhere. I think that's wrong, and I think we should do better. And even if you say, well, this is what non-free operating systems do, but the free software world is different, well, Ubuntu has their PPAs, which also has a complete chain of trust from the initial installation to the third-party repositories, as long as it is shipped through Ubuntu's PPA system. So it's not right. It's not correct, I think, to say that we don't need this at all. It is definitely useful and it can be helpful. So enter Extrepo. Extrepo is my answer to how do we fix this for Debian. The idea of Extrepo is that we have a central source of truth regarding app configuration with an uninterrupted signed chain from the initial installation all the way to your external repository. So if you trust your Debian installation disk, you can also trust the third-party repository that that you want to install later on. That's what I want to go to. So how do we do this? Well, we basically have a signed metadata repository with metadata on known third-party repositories. Obviously, if a third-party repository is not in the Extrepo, the metadata repository, then you can't enable it or manage it through Extrepo. But as long as it is, you can do that. Extrepo itself is, the command is fairly simple. I'm just going to switch off my camera here for a moment so you can read the whole text. Extrepo itself, the command is fairly simple. There's basically only 4 commands that exist. The enable command enables a known repository if it hasn't been enabled yet. If it has been enabled, it just re-enables it if you disable it with the next command, which is Extrepo disable. Then there's one called Extrepo search and an Extrepo update. Search is to search for repositories in the metadata. You can just read the YAML file itself, but it's easier to use search. And then update will resync the configuration with the current metadata, which is useful if keys change or configuration changes or whatever. Extrepo also implies enable because I don't. Update also implies enable because I can't see you wanting to update something without having it enabled at all. So, oops, yeah. Maybe a demo. Let's see how that works in practice. Let's go here. So basically, if I do I have a few repositories enabled through Extrepo on my system. Let's say I want to enable something else. I would like to run VS Codium, which is the free software version of Microsoft's VS Code. So let's do. I'm not sure if that is readable. Let me actually see. If it is not readable, let me know. But essentially, actually, I may just resize things just to make sure.
Maybe resize it a fair bit.
I'm trying to. There. That should be better. Oh.
Yep.
Basically, what you should see now is that I have enabled a repository. It doesn't produce any output, but that's expected. And you can see the VS Codium repository right there. It has been enabled. It wasn't enabled before, and it has been enabled now. If I run Extrepo disable VS Codium, then the file is still there, but you can see that the key enabled no has been added to disable the key, the repository that way. This is basically everything that is there. If I run Extrepo update for a particular repository, then it will re-download the key and rewrite the configuration, and that should do everything that is needed. It also uses signed by with a particular file name for the key, so that only that repository allows that key. This is what I did this after some feedback that I received on Debian, the film mailing list, and I think it made sense to do so. All right, what does the metadata file format look like? It's a simple YAML format. All repositories are configured through YAML in a file that is meant to be easy to understand. It might not be. If that's the case, I always accept patches. The input format is somewhat related to the output format. We can always change that if necessary. So if people think, well, it would be easy to do it this way, then that is always welcome. There is a template.yaml file with some comments in there that should explain how to write your own repository metadata if you want to. And all this repository metadata is post-processed by some Perl scripts into per codename variants and then signed by a GitLab runner that runs on my own server. It is highly locked down so that people can't abuse it. So it's only allowing signatures on this particular repository. The per codename variants, because if you say I have a repository that supports Buster and Bullseye and SID, for instance, then we get YAML files, one for Buster, one for Bullseye, and one for SID. If you run Extrepo enable on Buster, it will only download the Buster index file and not the Bullseye and SID ones because it doesn't care about those. So that's why we put it into separate per codename variants. It is served through GitLab pages on Salsa, which might not be the best idea long-term, but it was the easiest way to get started. Excuse me. Updates are done through merge requests. I do it this way so that I can also ensure that the files remain valid. There's some tests on the GitLab CI pipelines. Preferably, I would prefer if repository owners send a merge request, because that way I'm also sure that the metadata is kept up to date if the repository owner commits to that. But I don't insist on that, especially not in this early stage, because I want people to use it, right? There is also a separate repository for the packaging, and let me show you what the metadata looks like. Here we go. So this is the metadata repository. Basically, there's a template YAML file here, which looks like that. There's some comments in there. There is a description. Maybe I should zoom in again as well.
Yeah, make big.
Yeah, sorry, I just realized this should be better. Sorry about that. So the comments give instructions to people how to use it. You add a description. The source is these keys are copied directly into the .source file. Take note that a .source file and a .list file are both used by apt. This .source file is a dep822 file, which is not the same as the .list file. Not the same syntax. It's similar, but it's not exactly the same thing. There are some keys like the suite and components one that are replaced by the Perl code that mangles the input into the output, based on some keys that are used later, like the suites here. For instance, we say suites Bullseye and Buster. So the Buster index file will have suites Buster here rather than the suite that we see here. We also list whether a repository is DFSG free. So we say if the policy here, for instance, it can be main contrib or non-free, and they should be DFSG free software, or basically the way it works for Debian itself. You can either have it per component, or you can have one for the entire repository where you just say policy main if you only have main components or only have non-free components, to keep it simple. Finally, we have some keys for contact and bugs. There's currently no code in Extrepo that uses this, but it can be useful for the user, or if I need to contact you for some reason, whatever. And then finally, we need to add the GPG key. This is required. You can use some templating, etc., etc. How does that work in practice? Let's look at the one that I created for the Belgian EID repository. So we create Belgium EID. So basically, if I want to enable the EID repository, I just say Extrepo enable Belgium EID. So a description. This is the URIs that we use for Belgium EID. We use Sweet Stretch and Buster, and then the policies main because the EID software is GPLv3. Sorry, LGPLv3. And then finally the GPG key that we use to sign with, and a few more repositories. That's how that works. Let's go back to the slides. Why do I want to take this in the future? Well, first of all, I want to have some more repositories. I do already have quite a bit, but I think you can never have enough of them. It would be nice if people who are interested in this would join, but right now I still can handle everything. It's just that long term, I definitely would like some more volunteers. If anybody's interested, definitely would like more repositories. I had received some suggestion about installer support, the idea being that you could pre-seed, hey, I want to enable these external repositories, that happens just before the apt step, and then you can also install software from external repositories through pre-seeding, which would be cool. But then we would need more repositories because almost at the end, we also need an in-band distribution scheme. Right now, we do use GitLab Pages, which works. But DSA has already told me that they would prefer something that uses packages rather than something else. I'm going to look into that, but I just don't know exactly how to do it best. But it's definitely something we can look at. Maybe more repositories. It might be nice to also add this to some software frontends like GNOME software, so you can just enable an external repository directly from a GUI application. Oh, and yeah, we really need more repositories. That's all I have to say. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Yeah, so there have been 3 so far.
Okay.
Paul asked, does this work on Debian derivatives, for example, Ubuntu?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that Ubuntu packages Extrepo, and therefore you can run Extrepo on Ubuntu, but it would install a Debian repository, so it wouldn't work that way. I have made the YAML formats in such a way that if Ubuntu were to agree that this is a good idea and they wanted to use it as well, then we can just have an Ubuntu URL and that way, but that hasn't been implemented yet. So right now I wouldn't do it, but technically it's possible.
Okay, and then Ina asks, can you expand on the signed by GitLab CI part?
That's a good question. So I set up a GitLab runner on the VM that runs on my personal server. That is the only location where the signature key is. It is not a Docker runner, it is a shell runner. So the GitLab CI, when run on master, only when run on master, will just mangle the stuff there and then sign it from GitLab CI. You can look at the GitLab CI config. It's basically just GPG sign with this key, and that's it. This is maybe not an ideal solution long term, but it should be safe enough. And I definitely intend to review any changes to GitLab CI config with a microscope.
Okay, then Emorp1 asks, can it override oddities like Slack using Jesse for everything?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, let me just go back to the metadata template file. So basically here we have suites suite, which means replace the suite in this location with the suites that we have here. But if it needs Slack uses Jesse everything, then you just say suites Jesse here, and then it doesn't get overridden. What's also possible is, for instance, if you say, well, we use Jesse for Jesse and we use Stretch for everything following Stretch, then you can just say suite Jesse suites, and that says Jesse, and then suite Stretch. So you can override. Let me just go back to the YAML for documentation. So this block explains that if there are differences on a per suite basis, you can do suite buster architectures to say on buster we have those architectures, and you can do that for suites too. So it's definitely flexible enough to allow for that kind of oddities. Yes.
Cool. Well, thank you. Our time is up. So thanks a lot
Okay.
for the talk.
Welcome.
And yeah, enjoy
Hope
the rest
people
of your
enjoyed
time.
it. You too. Bye bye.